highlighting some use. So that she'll start highlighting some of our screens, and I'm going to maybe invite the way that we're going to do this. Sorry, I have to explain to the audience a bit of the structure. It's going to be a dialogue around the topic between us five. But at a certain point, we're going to ask all of you to participate in chat. So we're actually going to pause. A few of you that have participated in other NACT events have seen this already. We'll do a pause, we'll put on some music, and all of you will get a chance to reflect on either questions you have or things that really stood out to you or challenges that you're facing. And us as the speakers, we will read through those and then we'll reconvene and we'll try and build on your comments. So it's a way of bringing you in so that you're not just passive listeners, but actively contributing to the conversation. So you sort of will share at this point, when we keep the chat silent so you can really listen and participate in that way. But we encourage you to start typing at a certain point, and you sort of will give you the go ahead when you can press enter, so we get this flow of comments all at once. Enough for me. I'll jump back in when I have something more interesting to say. But I think I'd like to invite Francesca to start us off with whatever words you want to kick us off with.
Thanks, Brendon, and great to see everyone here about this exciting topic. I'm happy to see also some, I think, familiar faces or names, because I guess these the people working in the space is not that large, or there's a quite interconnected web of people out here working on this. So yeah, I guess I'm calling from New York today, but I actually live in Barcelona. And I'm part of a bunch of different communities and networks that I've been working in over the years. I also actually have worked with Theresa, who's here, because we know each other through the Ouishare network that started in 2012, which was very Europe focused. But I also have spent a lot of time in the Inspiral network. And so I guess one of the red threads in all my work in those networks has been experimenting with new ways of organizing, and I guess having a very practice-based, non-theoretical approach to self-organizing, because I would say I didn't even know about that term as a thing until a few years ago. So it was very much just like, we don't want to be a regular company, we want to be something else, and we don't know what it is, but let's just explore and see what happens when we try to make decisions as a big group. And so then I guess just to close the loop, a few years ago, I started a collective called GreaterThan that basically helps organizations and networks that want to do self-organizing. And one of the things we've really been trying to do, and that I'm really passionate about, is how we can really make it easier to do self-organizing and try to really understand, like, what are the common threads, the common challenges, what are things that have worked, and to just help each other to do this and to make it something that just doesn't feel so difficult. Because I think for many of us who have sort of gotten started, there's just so many things that don't exist yet that you need to figure out. And I think that there's so much knowledge around. So trying to really connect that knowledge and then help us just get better and better at doing this and finding the right way to implement it in each specific context, because it is so different in each network. So I think I'll maybe leave it at that to just sort of, I guess, share where I'm coming into this from, which is, I guess, really just, yeah, doing it myself a lot, the self-organizing, and then helping others doing it as well. So sort of the two sides. And I guess I'm supposed to throw the ball to somebody, or
I think we can just let people step in. But I want to say that I love not only the work of GreaterThan, but also of Ouishare and Inspiral. Am I saying right? Inspiral. And I think they're really pillars for. Have a lot of great examples and have been experimenting around this for years. So if anybody in the audience doesn't know of them, highly recommend checking them out. We can also share them in chat, because they have like handbooks and guides as to how they do these approaches. But sorry, I'm talking too much. So whoever wants to jump in and build on, Francesca, go ahead.
I'm happy to, as Fran already mentioned my name. So I'm Theresa, Fend. I'm from Austria originally, and right now I'm calling from Sweden, where we're staying in an eco community for a few months. So somehow immersed in self-organization at the moment. My background is a bit eclectic. I studied theater, film, and media sciences, and I have a bachelor in anthropology. I worked in a marketing agency for some time, then moved to Rwanda in East Africa. And because I needed a visa, I ended up starting a business. And I was very lucky to work with Impact Hub in Kigali as one of the very first community spaces, where I really fell in love with the idea that it's possible to just create a space and believe that people will step in if there is enough trust, if there is access to resources, and that the collective intelligence already knows what needs to happen, and we don't need to come from the outside with big solutions. And when I came back to Europe, I wanted to explore that idea more. I got in touch with Fran, who introduced me to Ouishare, which was really my self-organization kindergarten in a way, where I learned a lot of the tools and ways of being, also in a very practical way, without even knowing frameworks before that. It just felt really natural to step in. And so I have a really great experience of how to absorb the culture of self-organization from others. And since I've been working with a couple of different communities, some others of them are the Global Innovation Gathering, Grassroots to Global. I saw Dita from that community that is here in the call as well. Another one is the Boundless Roots community, and various others. So my focus has mostly been communications, internal and external, but also culture setting and community. And that's really my angle that I'm bringing to this conversation today, around what are the inner and outer enablers for self-organizations, what are the kinds of mindsets, what are the preconditions, what cultural elements also make it really hard to do that, because we all come usually from places where we don't self-organize. So this is something really new, and there is a gap between where we actually are and where we want to be, and how do we hold that gap and move closer. And also how do our collective and individual patterns help us and also hinder us, and how do we work with that in a creative, playful, and regenerative way. Another important angle is climate activism. So for me, that's a very big case also for self-organization. If we head into uncertain futures, we need to be able to collaborate, to trust each other, to be flexible, to adapt, to be creative, to take care of each other. And I see, self-organization is one of the very big promising steps in that direction. That's me.
Who's next?
Is anybody brave to step in? Yeah.
I'm happy to jump in. So Theresa, you mentioned a number of topics that really speak to me as well. So I'm Cheri, I'm from the Accountability Lab, and today I'm calling in from just outside Washington, DC. I work in an organization focused on governance and specifically anti-corruption work. And at the Accountability Lab, we work across 12 different countries to essentially get citizens engaged in holding governments more accountable. And we try to do this in a different type of network fashion. So we call ourselves a translocal network. So instead of having a headquarters that's usually based in the global north, sort of feeding down ideas and solutions into a network of people in the global south, and sort of imposing what networks should look like and what solutions should look like there. We are across all of the 12 countries where we work, peer organizations, and there's no headquarters. And we're trying to model in a way what equitable development work could look like. And beyond just our organizational structure, networks play a really deep role in how we do our work. So when we think about countries that are endemically corrupt, one thing that we'll always see is that there's a lack of trust between people and power holders and between even community members, right? Because that's what corruption does. It erodes that social fabric and the social contract that we share. And so we build something called Unlikely Networks, which is working with people who are musicians from different areas within the arts, journalists, people who aren't necessarily the usual actors in talking about things like governance and participation, so that through them, we're able to invite new voices into these governance conversations. And the voices we want to have in these networks are those who are marginalized, rural communities who are often cut off, communities with low literacy, women, and young people who don't often have, whose voices aren't often amplified in these network conversations where they should be heard and where their rights should be validated and acknowledged. And this idea of unlikely networks is, as Theresa mentioned the word kindergarten. It is for us also very much still a kindergarten. We're learning along the way that, you know, one model doesn't work in all countries. But in essence, if I had to distill it down, how I look at our work on a day-to-day basis is for networks to thrive at the hyperlocal and at the national and at the global level around really important issues. We still need to create a sandbox for that to happen. And in a way, at the Accountability Lab, we think about what that sandbox for governance conversations might look like, so that people who are disenfranchised are invited in to be part of those conversations and are no longer outside of that sandbox.
Okay. I think you already unmuted.
I was confused about the little pin that was here. I was like, oh, do I need to do something? So I'm Carri Munn, and I come from Converge, and I see some of my colleagues here. It's nice to see some friendly faces. And Converge is a network of practitioners that support people who are developing, launching, and cultivating impact networks. And so we are our own kind of laboratory for some of these practices. So we, I think, bring with us into the world our own experience, as well as mix that with the experiences of the many networks that we've been supporting over the years, and recently started offering leadership training for network leaders, because it's just near and dear to our heart to help share these ways. And I think there's been so much that's been said about ways of being in particular, and accountability and inclusion, and all of these different ways of thinking, the combination of the outer tools and practices, but also the inner awareness of working in different ways is something that I'm really attuned to at the moment, and inspired to just think about and watch and observe. And there are a lot of tensions in doing this work, because it's different, because it takes time. You know, we're so oriented toward efficiency is one of the things that I see. And people who come to networks are often people who want to make change, and they are achievement focused, and they want to make things happen. And yet, you know, like Cheri said, trust is so important, and people don't necessarily move forward at the pace that they would like, or the pace that they imagine, when that trust is missing. And so I'm in the experience of and witnessing these tensions between self-organizing that we think about, or I think about as some combination of agency. I'm empowered to do something, to move with what inspires me, and I have choice to do that, and obligation to consider and include and understand, if I move forward, what impact does that have, and who does that serve, and who does that potentially, you know, disempower or limit, consciously or unconsciously. And I was really inspired by the word, bringing in the word regenerative. So how can these systems also that kind of contain a lot of tension, you know, we're at our learning edge as human beings often, and how can these experiences be regenerative learning experiences is a question that I'm asking myself a lot.
Carri, you gave me an inspiration. I'm curious how others define self-organizing. In the same way as Carri, would there be anything you add? Because I think often we talk about it and everybody has different interpretations of what it means. And in a way, Carri, something I want to pick on you for later is in one of our prep calls, our pre-prep calls, Carri told me something along the lines of, I don't even think there is such thing as self-organizing. I think the word is wrong. More or less, that's how I interpreted it. Don't answer yet, Carri, because I probably am saying it the wrong way, but I want to tease that out as well. But I think, yeah, what does it mean to us when we say that?
Yeah, I mean, I think when I think about that, because like also we can fight about terms, I find that usually terminology is not a useful debate in many cases. But to me, what always seems really essential is about the decision making being closest to where the action is actually happening. And that basically anyone who is going to be highly impacted by a decision to be able to be actively shaping it. And so that's why like that might be, you know, lots of small groups that are making their own decisions and then coordinating with each other. But like that you always default to the closest person to the actual place of impact or the person who's doing it. They're the ones that are like driving the decision in a way. So to me, that's just like what seems like such an important principle, which is also sort of the opposite of how like traditional corporations are often structured, right? Which is more like the person farthest away is calling the biggest shots. So that seems really important to me, whether we call it self-organizing or not.
Theresa, Cheri, anything to add about what it means to you?
I love what you just said, Fran. How I usually explain it to people is that it's the attempt to live fluid power by combining structure, which refers to decision-making processes, but also to roles and mandates and ways to link them up to each other, and shared agreements, for example, with culture. And that's more in the realm of mindset, in the realm of values, in the realms of willingness to unlearn things, to do the deep work, to really show up, to step into leadership, take responsibility, step back and make space for others, and so on.
Cheri, anything?
I also think it looks, I agree with everything Fran and Theresa already mentioned, but I think it also looks different in different places because your starting point is different, right? If we had to look at the textbook type of definition, it presupposes some like level of equity that we come in as partners in a way that like have the same level of voice or agency in an ideal setting. And I know that all of us work in settings that are not ideal and that we understand that it is, you know, we're learning along the way. But I think also like culturally in certain places, when you are trying to bring even small networks of people at a hyper local level together, you have to like have a deep understanding and respect for the sort of the social norms that are embedded there, because some of the ideas we may hold true would be superseded by the social norms that are relevant in that space. In some countries where we work, it's much as I would like to, it's almost impossible to overcome the idea of, you know, sort of like strong patriarchal leadership, because that just is what it is. So it's also about working realistically in the spaces where we are, while trying to model a different way of equitable participation.
I'm not going to call on people anymore, so just go with it. Let's keep talking.
I'm really struck by working with people where they are, and the impact of the embedded norms of our existing culture, and how we engage with them when they work against or create tension with ways that we want to be that are more inclusive. And there's a lot of energy in that conversation about what's the best we can do right now, without how can we invite people to something new or something that's 10 or 15% more than they have been doing, and allow them to trust one another and experiment at an edge that feels worthy of the stretch, but not so far away that they feel like it's brittle or they would contract.
Yeah, maybe building on that, I guess one of the things that I find most interesting and challenging, which I think you've sort of touched on, when we think about this idea of being peers in a network and having equity, that the biggest shift seems that we're expecting everyone to show up like as an adult, fully responsible for themselves. And that's something that even if, you know, the network has maybe had that culture from the start, that most of us are just not in that type of environment most of the time in our life, whether that's school or our previous jobs, that we're sort of always in this parent-child dynamic. And so we actually, I think we learned this in GreaterThan from the Tough Leadership program. It's called TUFF, about adult to adult relating, which I think is just a really useful concept. And I guess just to share like an anecdote of one thing I really observed a lot in Ouishare, which I think generally happens with any org, but especially with networks, is that people project a lot of expectations onto it. And basically we have this dynamic of like, oh, that thing, like Ouishare owes me something, but like it's all of us, like we're all doing it together. So like you need to create that change, or you need to help do that. And I think there's something about, especially with networks, because it's not maybe clear who's holding it or who you can, you know, ask for support from, that like there's this sort of general expectations that just get put onto it, and that then can often be a bit of a center point for a lot of different tensions or disappointment, because people aren't getting from it that doesn't exist what it is that they were hoping.
I think one of the things that I've recently learned a lot about is that kind of, I wouldn't even call it managing expectations, but creating the right expectations. And you know, one of the other conversations we had about in enact a few weeks ago was about boundaries, and it was about how much do you just let your boundaries in your network be porous versus having kind of strict membership boundaries. And I think one of the tensions I had is, well, you know, you open it up too much, then people will just, it becomes harder to weave, to coordinate. But then a light bulb came through where somebody was just talking about how if you have multiple different kinds of spaces and you manage expectations, or you have different levels of engagement and you manage those expectations, and I think managing is probably like communicating them over and over again, co-creating them, but making sure, like I was even inspired that for the sign-in screen for enact, I created kind of I put our guiding principles there, because I think those little things, like if you sign up for this, you're expected to show up at least 4 out of 5 times, because that's respecting your other people in your mini group. Little things like that can make an enormous difference. And then you really pass this challenge of accountability, because otherwise we do get stuck in this way of, we have to bring people in, we have to force people or push people to do something, rather than creating these spaces where people are accountable to each other. Obviously, the depth of relationships and trust and mutual respect also create that sort of accountability. So you can't, it's not one or the other, but I always think from the structural standpoint. And so I'm actually curious from those who are here, like, so self-organization in organizations, or self-management, or whatever we want to call it, is one thing. Self-organization in networks is another thing. They're very similar in many ways, but there are also differences. You made me think about this, Francesca, because the accountability piece in an organization, ultimately you are like, somebody's paying you, somebody's there's a bit more of a accountability than you have in a network. So that's one difference I see. And Carri, I remember a year ago, we were having a conversation in your network learning series about how those boundaries between networks and organizations are starting to bleed. But I'm just curious what you all see as where there are differences and similarities.
I can jump in with one difference that I see that you mentioned is the way that accountability works in organizations. And I think there's an assumption that I have, some measure of power over just by contract, because you agreed to accept a paycheck. So you also, in that agreement that we made with one another, you agreed to do some of the things that I say. That may not be what you yourself would choose all of the time. And so there's an understanding there. But in networks, and this maybe is a thread also back to the comment I made about maybe there isn't such a thing as self-organizing, because what you mentioned, Brendon, about the guidelines, those I think are tools for coordinating, and those are structures for organizing around. And I think something needs to be, at Converge, we talk about having a purpose at the center that everybody can relate to. And so also you mentioned boundaries around the, who's coming to be part of this purpose. Did you agree? And so there's this field of agreements that we make with one another about how we'll be together. And I think that kind of invisible structure, as well as somebody playing the role of doing the communicating over and over again and helping to hold the whole, that's part of that sandbox of what enables people to move of their own agency and be creative. But I think that there needs to be, some kind of structure by which we organize.
And before Theresa and Cheri, I'm sure you have things to say, but Carri, your comment just reminded me of something I loved that you and Nick, your colleague from Converge, did last year. It was super simple, but just listing in front of everybody, these are the ways you can engage, and asking people to raise their hands how they want to engage. And that kind of accountability to the group is much more powerful than if you send me a message or if I have a call with just you, because then I'm just accountable to you. And if I don't follow through, it doesn't, it's just consequence on one person instead of the group. So, but sorry, Theresa, Cheri.
So I love this concept too. And, often when we are convening or we're like working together against something big, like we're advocating for a policy change, right? And so we're organizing around that. It's very easy to fall into the trap of just like vertical accountability, like it's all of us against, I don't know, this government agency that has a policy that is harmful to our community, or, a private sector actor that is doing something that's harmful to our community. But I always try to emphasize that the vertical accountability can't work if there's not like horizontal accountability amongst us. And often when we even picture the word accountability, we see that vertical axis of holding those in power accountable. But if we want to change and reimagine like where the power lies in any group of society, then we also need to hold each other accountable, because for many of the bigger, whether it be environmental, political, social justice causes we work on, it's often a supply and demand issue. And if we at this like horizontal axis we keep fueling like actively some of these challenges as well. And so we also need that like horizontal accountability to say that, yeah, you're actually part of the problem if we don't at this level change how we work and engage.
Theresa, before we break the chat, do you want to leave us with a few words?
Very quick. I love this idea of decentralizing the task of holding people accountable that you just brought in. And some other thoughts that I just wanted to bring in is accountability also comes from relationship. If I'm close to you, if I care for you, then I'm accountable for my actions that affect you. And it also comes from maturity. or of a sense of belonging to wider things. So if I feel like I'm accountable to all life on Earth, and I want my actions to be aligned with that, then maybe I don't need a boss or money as an incentive. And another thing around how self-organization doesn't exist is the suggestion to think about it as a spectrum. I don't think that there is a place where it does not exist at all, and another one where it's fully embodied in all moments, but it's something that can come into spaces gradually and sometimes also fluctuate, be there more or less in different moments of time. And I guess that's also something that can take away some of the fear of stepping in, that it's not something that we can achieve from today to tomorrow, but something that we can practice together, and a mindset that we can invite into the places where we interact, take decisions, and work together.
So thanks, Theresa, and everyone. So I'm Yusra, if you want to go ahead and try and start the music. We're just going to unspotlight all of ourselves and allow you a chance to just type in chat, as a few people already did. Share questions, comments, any kind of reflections that you have. We'll do this for about 4 minutes, and then we'll come back and respond to what you've written. And as you're typing, since we're unspotlighted, if you want to turn on your videos, we can see your lovely faces. You're welcome to. So I'll allow you to keep typing if you want to add anything else. And in the meantime, you sort of can re-spotlight us. And I see themes, a lot of great comments in here, themes of leadership and roles, themes of agency, which I'd really love to have somebody speak about, and kind of trust and tools and and also flexibility. What would you all like to build upon? Just jump in, whoever wants to start. I mean, there's more stuff to build on than we have time for, but
There's so much. I would love to pick on the idea of trust and trust building and failure and trust and how you create it. And the reality is that there's just simply no quick fix for trust. It's understanding the community and having even the how we build trust being driven by that community. And that means that, you know, it's even problematic for us as an external party, any of us, to come into a particular community that we're not fully a part of and try to create the sandbox or set the parameters for that, like, relationship building. And so I think it's so important that we always highlight and put at the forefront people who are from that space and in the space and understand the dynamics and the challenges and the solutions. And this also speaks to an earlier point around people who've had over agency and people who've, like, not had agency. It's about, I think, our understanding of these biases. So, like, constantly questioning, like, how decisions are being made and who's making those decisions. We can't say we're building trust and we're all equal, but at the end of the day, there's still a core group of people making the decisions, right? So I think we build trust and we overcome those endemic power dynamics by consistently, intentionally, and actively choosing to do better and to do things differently. And the consistency is part of the trust building. If you, as an organization, as an individual organizer, consistently show a different way, then people start trusting you and believing you and start working together in ways that are maybe not the norm in that community.
I would really like to pick up on that because it feels really important for the leaders of networks and of these different ways of working to understand what fosters trust and what destroys trust, because they are, you know, making proposals and modeling for other people. And so I couldn't agree more with the consistency and the ways of being that the leaders present with, because that engenders, you know, not just trust between people, but trust for the whole system to work. You know, that this network or this collective is worth investing in because I see how decisions are made and I see how things are moving. And so I can trust the experience of people coming together and operating in a way that will, you know, be sustaining or sustainable and not alienating.
Yeah, and I guess maybe to build on that, like, obviously, you know, how to build trust is, like, it's a very complex question and there's no formula in any way. And I think, though, that what I've seen in groups is that, like, something that can really accelerate it is actually how you deal with the challenges. So when there's actually a difficult situation, if you're then able to hold it as a group, then that leads to, like, a real change and, like, a deepening of the trust. But obviously, before you've gotten there, you don't know if you can trust the group to deal with it. So it's a bit of a stress test in a way. But I do think that, like, there's a big difference for me in me trusting an individual or many different individuals in a group and me trusting the group and its dynamic and, like, how can it actually cope when there's, you know, a crisis? Like, what does it do? And so I think, like, even just, I guess, sort of finding ways to test out, like, is it safe for me to put something in the middle? This is something we talk about sometimes in GreaterThan that we've really been trying to push ourselves to do. Like, if I have a challenge that comes up for myself, rather than me trying to solve it alone or, like, finding two people and discussing with them, but, like, can I bring it to the middle of the group, like, put it there and, like, get support from the whole system in a way? Like, if that's possible, then that really increases the feeling of safety and trust. But I think that this does go back to the topic of boundaries that has come up quite a lot. And I think this is definitely true for both the in-person and the virtual, which is that the boundaries being held seems essential. And I think that doesn't mean that you can't have like a sort of semi-porous open group, but like it needs to be clear, how do people come and go? And like, how is that somehow being, like, we sometimes call it guarding the edge. It's like, who's looking out for that? Is that a group? Is that an individual? And the communities I've seen that have sort of like fizzled out, or where the safety has decreased, it's usually because that boundary isn't being held as clearly. And so people don't feel like they can actually bring that.
Because some people, I think, tend to be a part of the community, but not follow all of the kind of accountability or rules of engagement, and not subscribe to them. And if that's not clearly that, okay, we're on this boundary, this, like, I've chosen this level of engagement, then it can make other people feel frustrated. And I've seen this so many times, just whether you're setting up peer learning groups or working groups or all these things that we set up as networks, which all work in slightly different, they all have slightly different aims and slightly different structures, but they're more or less trying to set up small groups of people to learn or do stuff together. But when people don't follow those rules of engagement, then it just, everybody else, it just crumbles really, really quickly. And I think just to kind of build on one other thing you were saying, Fren, is about I think it's not just being like able to stress test when there are difficult situations, but actually, in a way, almost finding them and embracing the conflict and seeing conflict as a good thing, because conflict not only creates innovation and ideas, but it also creates these safe spaces. We often are hesitant. We see conflict as something to cover up or to avoid, or wait until it gets too big, and that's harms this whole process. So conflict needs to be addressed at the very beginning with all of the people who have a stake in that conflict, I think. Theresa, I think you wanted to say something too. I might have interrupted you.
So many things. Yeah, just wanted to add a bit to the topic of boundary. I think it's both the boundary in terms of community, who is in, who is out, and what ways do we have to navigate if we want to tell somebody to leave, or if you want to sanction in a way somebody's behavior if it's really disruptive. And we cannot, with all of the resources and the knowledge that we have, find a way to move forward together, which is really a big learning edge. In Extinction Rebellion, for example, I've been in the global support team, and we said on our website, we welcome everybody and every part of everybody. And we wanted that to be true, but we had to also come to the realization that actually we do not have the skills yet, we do not have the resources yet to actually make that a lived practice, to also hold conflicts in a way where we can transform them and keep working together with everybody across all of the differences in terms of vision for change, in terms of access to technology to ensure equal participation, in terms of education, in terms of economic backgrounds and so on. There was just so much difference for us to bridge, that also in a movement where we did not have so much time to actually adapt, to upskill, to keep up with our growth, to really hold that. So a very important learning was also to name this boundary around what are we able to do in this space and what can we not do. So it's probably coming back to this, this idea of expectation. Like, we aim to be an inclusive place, but these are the ways in which actually we are not there yet. And I think that also creates trust if you're able to be very clear and transparent around the limitations that you have.
Theresa, I couldn't agree more with what you just said. It's about being so honest about that we're all trying here. And that even creates accountability between us as practitioners. I've seen, in different ways how a organization or a network can put forth a beautiful mission that is super inclusive, and that can actually create a veneer under which we then don't actually interrogate, but is this thing that we're doing inclusive? Or do we just think we're all on the same page about inclusivity because we've bought into this mission? And I think for accountability, like, I'm so pro people just being honest that we're learning and we're going to make mistakes. And when we say we're inclusive, we can't yet reach everyone. But we invite you to come on this learning journey with us, because I think if we're not honest about the expectations, it's so easy to hide under this veneer of we're all doing good work, right? And we're not interrogating ourselves and our peers around, are we really doing work that's inclusive?
And I think that inability or over promising is one of the ways that the system itself becomes untrustworthy, because people see the difference between what is being said and their experience of engaging with what's happening. And so that honesty and that learning is always appropriate, because everything is different all the time, you know, so that the best we can do this week might look differently than the best we can do next week, because people are more or less resourced, or there are more or fewer people who showed up today than last week. So what can we do? What can we do to meet this moment?
How do you do that? How do you interrogate whether the spaces are inclusive, are diverse, especially if your network is vast and sprawling and your team is small?
I mean, I think that it's really important to have some kind of spaces where you can see the system together. So like some kind of way to step out with some subset of the people in that network and to look at it from the outside, or like, you know, as much as you can since you are part of it, and to sort of like put together the puzzle pieces to see the bigger picture. Because of course, each of us is just experiencing things from one vantage point. So we might not know that like the thing I'm experiencing, oh, actually 10 other people are feeling the same thing, and this is actually a challenge or an issue. Or maybe like I'm the odd one out, and actually this isn't really a challenge. So yeah, I think that it's almost like sort of sometimes sense making is the term also, but I think that also I could really recommend circle practice of some form for this, which exists in a lot of cultures, but it's basically some version of a practice of being in a circle with a strong intention and having space for whatever comes up. Some people call it councils, or there's many different terms, but I think that can be a really powerful one for things that maybe people can't quite articulate yet to emerge, and for there to be like a bigger sense of what is this thing to then work with whatever comes up.
And I mean, I think one of the things that I've seen in the chat is about skills and leadership, and how, I think because a lot of people on this call are probably the ones that are trying to figure out how they can either shift as leaders, or their colleagues can, or they can work with their network leaders. And a lot of this is just mindset shifting, combined with exposure, because in my experience, most people understand that something's wrong, but don't know what else is possible. And it takes them 1 to 2 years to see what is possible, and they have to be a part of it. You can't just explain it. And then they start to see the light. And that's the most difficult process. But I think, I'm curious what all of you see as the key leadership traits to do this kind of work and enable a kind of thriving and self-organized network. For me, it's just a lot of role modeling and a lot of coaching, and just seeing where people have needs or questions or troubles, and stepping in and giving them suggestions and advice, and demonstrating it over and over and over again, and communicating it over and over again yourself. But what, I don't know, what other skills or leadership traits do you all think are important?
There's so many. It's a long list.
Let's list them.
I feel like one, I'll say one quickly, is about the capacity for deep listening. And that's listening to how people speak, and whether they are moving towards someone or something with inspiration, or whether they're moving away, and being sensitive to, you know, listening to that and watching that within a group to see where the sense of the whole is collectively.
Mm.
And I think coupled with that deep listening is like constant inquiry and critical thinking. Don't become so like invested in this thing that you think it's just working because it's going the way you thought it would be going, but like ask yourself, you know, who's speaking, when are they speaking, who's making the decisions, and like who are we not even hearing?
For me, it's really more a mindset than a skill. The idea that leadership is not something that a few people have, but something that all of us can and should step into. And it's a quality that we can practice. And it's the idea to take care of the whole with whatever skills and knowledge you have, the information that you receive as being part of the system. Yeah, that's really at the base for that, and then figuring out what your personal way of stepping in is.
Yeah, and I guess I just want to add on to that I think there's a really great framework called Full Circle Leadership by someone called Alana Irving. And it's really helpful because there was also this question about charismatic leadership earlier that I saw, which is basically she sort of developed like it's like a full circle, and it's like sort of displays the diversity of what we can consider as leadership. And like charismatic visionary leadership is one little piece of the circle, but there's also like the leadership of prototyping, the leadership of measurement, the leadership of maintenance, right? Like who's gonna lead in how we actually maintain our systems and a healthy network, which are such important things that tend to get undervalued, and we always just focus on the visionary leadership. So I just find that's a really beautiful framework to like see how everyone can show up as a leader with whatever their strengths are, and that we can see that as real leadership, not just like those who are supporting the visionary.
Yeah, like testing where the systems are falling, and seeing, does that mean we need to communicate it more? Does that mean we need to bring people in? Does that mean we need to change it? And I think there's so many more things, obviously, we can unpack. You sort of shared in the chat the way that we like to close. So we invite you to all just share a quick comment, something you heard that inspired you and that might bring you to that might bring you to take forward something new and action. We always like to have that as a closing piece. I just, in addition to saying that there's so much more to unpack, I think there's a lot of pieces about the structural element of how you organize roles, of how you engage in consensus decision making, of how you have these cycles of learning and reflection, and you really can't, a lot of this is rooted in the circles principles or sociocracy or holacracy, whatever else. But you can't have one without the other. A lot of something that I say a lot is you can't have a space for people to feel comfortable with making decisions in a consensus-based way without having them know that these decisions will be reviewed, for example, at a certain point and reflected upon, and we will learn from them. Because then otherwise people get stuck in like, well, this is the final decision, this is where we need to go. So a lot more to unpack here, but this is just the beginning. enact is really set up to be a launch for all of these conversations around networks. And we're hoping that this starts to lead to new mindsets and practices, but also new connections, new collaborations. We at inHive run a network for people who are running networks to try to figure out how to do all of this work. So we invite you to show up for that. There will be a lot more to come after all of this. But for right now, what I always like to do to close us out is just, first of all, obviously to say thanks to the speakers and for your time and your energy, and in particular for experimenting with all of these things before before other people really accept it as an institutional way of working and going up against all those barriers. but also to all of everyone who came today and contributed, particularly in the chat. What I love to do to close is just to, before you click the leave button, just to ask you to unmute and say a final word, a goodbye or a thank you or anything.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Great time.
Gratitude.
Thanks so much, everyone. It was really great.
Nice job.
Thank you.